Could we all be upstanding for the prayer, please? Almighty God, we who are gathered together in council pledge ourselves to work in harmony for the welfare and development of our rural city. Guide us, we pray, in our deliberations. Help us to be fair in our judgment and wise in our actions, so that prosperity and happiness shall be the lot of our people. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Be seated, please. Good evening and welcome to the February Ordinary Meeting of Council, this Wednesday the 24th of 2021. You will notice tonight we are in a different venue to normal. We're in Merbeen at the Merbeen Community Hub. If you haven't visited this facility, I highly encourage you to do so. The library is a fantastic facility and definitely worth visiting. As part of our efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19, in accordance with Section 395 of the Local Government Act 2020, this council meeting is being live streamed on council's website and is unfortunately not open to the public to attend in person. The audio and video recordings will be published on council's website within 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. In accordance with the Chief Health Officer, direction for Victorians is to wear masks. All those present tonight will be wearing a mask unless a medical exemption has been provided. When addressing the meeting, the Speaker may choose to take off the mask in order to be clearly heard and understood. Tonight at item 17, we will be considering two confidential reports. The live stream will be concluded once Council resolves to move into confidential business. This aspect of the recording will not be made public to our website. Thank you. Thank you and welcome back to tonight's meeting. We've just incurred a little bit of technical difficulty, but we will start again. We were at item 3, which is who is present at CEO Philpott, Mr Richard Sexton, Councillor Eckel, Councillor De Pieri, Councillor Ian Arney, Andrew Millen sitting in for Mandy Whelan for the Corporate Manager Development, Martin Hawson for the GM for Community, and Chris Parham, the GM for Corporate. We have Councillor Liam Wood, Councillor Jodie Reynolds, Councillor Cindy Power, Councillor Glenn Milne and Deputy Mayor Helen Healy. Item 4 is apologies and absences. We don't have any. Sorry again, everybody. We've had a secondary problem with tech. We've sorted that out, and we'll move on. We've moved on to item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes. We had an ordinary meeting held of council on the 27th of January. We had a confidential meeting on the same day, and we had a special meeting held on the 10th of February 2021. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eckel. A seconder, Councillor De Pieri. Does anybody want to object to that motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We move to item 6 on the agenda, which is the confirmation of council Auspis meetings. With the recommendation at item 2 that council note the following records of council Auspis meetings. We had a planning meeting on the 25th of January, a council forum on the 10th of February and a council forum on the 12th of February. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor De Pieri. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reynolds. Does anybody want to object to that motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 7 on the agenda, which is the notice of absences. There are none. Thank you, Richard. We now move to item 8, and at 8.1 we have the mayoral report in January 2021. The recommendation that council note the contents of the report. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eckel. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Milne. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 9, to 9.1, Councillor Reports, January 21, with a recommendation that Council note the contents of this report. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Wood, a seconder.
Second with a further report.
Councillor Milne. Report. I'll go to your report first, Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I attended last week on the internet the Rail Freight Alliance meeting. The main topic, it was our AGM, but the main topic of that meeting was basically the abandoning of the Murray Basin Rail project. While there's been money allocated from the federal government, which is fantastic, to supposedly continue that project, the funds are being spent on concrete sleepers on parts of the railway line which aren't able to be converted to standard line. So basically what they're doing is rebuilding a broad gauge line, which isn't the intent of the of the Murray Basin Rail project. And there's a lot of angst right along that railway line and by all those communities. So it's one that as a council we've been very much involved in, because it's our freight that goes to Melbourne, but it also means that the railway line is going to continue, or the standard line, continue to detour around via Ararat, which takes longer to get freight to market. So it makes rail less competitive with trucks, keeps more trucks on the road, and from that, those trucks actually clog up Melbourne, and we're getting a second-rate system. So that's quite a matter of concern, and we'll hear more about that in the coming months. The RFA are meeting again at the end of this week to actually go through that and work out a strategy that how we deal with that in an ongoing manner, and how we can get all the councils involved behind us. So you'll hear more on that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Oh, and on that note, and excuse me for not acknowledging it earlier, congratulations on becoming the President of the Rail Freight Alliance again.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We'll see how that goes this year on with internet problems and meeting like that. It does make life a bit harder with those small groups, but yeah, I'm looking forward to the challenge.
Thanks, Glenn. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. 3 things to report. I'm a new member of the Audit and Risk Committee, and through the committee I've been following the New South Wales Central Coast financial disaster, and it's chilly reading, and all the councils have been sacked and under administration, including having to secure a $150 million loan to pay current creditors, and they're looking at a $560 million debt level. And to that end, I just want to commend our staff, our financial team, our CEO, the risk and financial audit team, and encourage all councillors to be super mindful as we go into developing our own budget of the financial responsibility we have and the good track record we have locally. Secondly, last month that we're reporting on, I attended a meeting with Sarah Gruner, the Director for the Auspis for Women, and she reported happily to us that Mildura is really well placed to get funding mid-year to finance and the ongoing finance of the gender equality work and the preventative family violence work that's been occurring here, of which Mildura City Council has been exemplary in their commitment to that. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and working with the community team to secure that funding. And lastly, I was privileged enough to be a guest speaker at the Survival Day event in January. And I urge everybody to attend this event next year. It always follows very closely on from the official council event earlier in the morning. And it's an important way to listen to the stories that are being told, and where you'll hear not only the impact of the effect of colonisation, but more importantly, or just as importantly, our true and deep history and how important it is for the future of our country to acknowledge this cultural richness that we all have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Is there any other councillors like to speak to their reports, which we attended in January? No? All good?
Okay, Mr. Mayor, is it appropriate or possible for me to make a comment in regards to the railways issue, as I would like to add some comment to Councillor Milne's report? Is it out of order?
No, I think briefly, Councillor De Pieri, if
Yes,
it's relevant,
thank you,
to
Mr.
Councillor
Mayor. I
Milne's
was
report.
very puzzled and curious as to why a government and the Railway Authority will be undertake something as unusual as doing 15 kilometres of rail with concrete as opposed to normal timber railway sleepers. And as I understand, that section of the line is very exposed to termite danger. Now, I don't take this as gospel, but I think it's important to note that. And furthermore, the authorities are suggesting that should the line go to another gauge, those can be removed and redeployed somewhere else in case of necessity. So it's a rather complex situation, notwithstanding the fact that the ambition to take trucks off the road is everyone's ambition. The completion of that project is of paramount importance. But when we speak about these things, I think we ought to be sort of a bit more cognizant of the fact that we're not governed by totally rational people.
Thank you, Councillor De Pieri. Is there any other councillors who'd like to speak to their report? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We move to item 10.1 on the agenda, which is a question by Councillor Mark Eckel relating to the Country Music Festival. Are you happy with the answer to that question, Councillor Eckel?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, but I'm concerned with the Premier's 5-day lockdown and what that will mean to events such as the Mildura Country Music Festival in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Eckel. Item 10.2, Councillor Eckel's National Flags at the Visitor Information Centre. Councillor Eckel, are you happy with that response?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Item 10.3, you were a busy councillor last meeting, Councillor Eckel. 10.3, Councillor Eckel's Cultural Plan Development. Are you happy with the answer to that, Councillor Eckel?
Yes, thank you, and I'd like to thank the General Manager Community for the continued discussion that we're having over this. Looking forward to later on in the year.
Thank you, Councillor Eckel. Item 10.4 is a question from Councillor De Pieri, assistance following the hailstorm event in Anzac.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. The answer is fine, and I also am impressed that Councillor Milne also went to visit the area and inspect the damage.
Thank you, Councillor De Pieri. Item 10.5 on the agenda is a question from Councillor Milne, the Powerhouse Precinct Concept Plan. Councillor Milne.
Happy with that, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Item 10.6 on the agenda is another question from Councillor Milne in regard to the wild dog management. Councillor Milne, are you happy with the response there?
I'm happy with our response. I'm waiting for a stronger response and really some answers to the question from the government. So hopefully we get that.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Item 10.7 on the agenda was a question from Councillor Reynolds, the land adjacent to the St Razia Hockey Club. Councillor Reynolds, are you happy with the response to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes and no. I'm happy that we actually, as a council, own that land adjacent to the hockey club. It's a lovely, great big piece of land. It's terrific that we have that as an opportunity to expand a sport into that area. I still have to be convinced that having 2 more hockey fields on the southern side of that hockey field is going to impact soccer being able to expand into that area. But I'm confident that the review that's underway is going to address those issues, and that once that review is complete, then we'll have some very happy users over there at the old aerodrome sporting complex.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Agenda item 10.8 was another question from you, Councillor Reynolds, about the bike tracks.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm satisfied with that answer, and I'm also looking forward to working with councillors and council staff to actually look towards getting another bike track, as per that answer, into the budget in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. At item 10.9, we have a question from Councillor here, resources for gender equality initiatives. Councillor Healy.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy with that answer, and as I mentioned previously, looking forward to working with the manager community when the Office for Women release the details about the funding opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Item 11 is questions from councillors. Do I have questions? We have a question from Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor,
Councillor
I don't know how to deal with this one, but I'm sure the CEO might be able to help me. But I'm pretty disappointed with the state government in regards to Anzac Day being cancelled. Now, Moomba had been cancelled, and now because of the public outcry, he's putting it back on. Now, the issue is, I think, my personal perspective is that Anzac Day is much more important than Moomba. And I don't know what the other councillors think, but I believe that I would like to see a letter drafted to the government or to the local member saying how disappointed we are that Anzac Day can't be held, and that we need to address that issue for all our servicemen, both those ones that have served us well, and also the service people that are overseas at the moment serving us. I just think it's a terrible blight on our community that particular event can be taken away from us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, through the Mayor. What I'll undertake to do is get a status update on the Anzac Day situation. As councillors would be aware, events and COVID restrictions change almost on a daily basis, so I'll undertake to get an update for you, and should the status of that still be cancelled at this point, then we can certainly draft some correspondence and send something out asking for reconsideration.
Thank you, Madam CEO. It's a rolling issue, this, because I saw on television throughout Australia, Win TV, during the week, where the Odeon Football Club too were interviewed about the issue around a limit of 1,000 people at a game, and I saw the president of the football club say that he can't understand why the bureaucrats can't understand the situation with regional Victoria. How if you knock back people at the gate, how he can't walk down his main street without being accosted by the community saying, well, you know, you never let me in. And that's, you know, I just think that there's no sentiment, there's no respect in regards to regional Victoria when it comes around the COVID situation, Mr Mayor, and I think that needs to be addressed in some way too.
Thank you, Councillor Eccles.
The next question I have, Mr Mayor, for the Acting General Manager Infrastructure through yourself, of course. Visiting the Mervyn Economic Development Board AGM, the perennial subject of the extension of 14th Street from Ontario Avenue to Flora was raised. Could I ask what the current status is of that project? To my knowledge, no full costing analysis is done in recent times. I think the last one was done about 10 years ago. And I'd like us to be brought up to date with what the costing was for that particular piece of road infrastructure, which would incidentally be Council's road. Another question is, could councillors be provided with, I've got an estimate of the costs, and that'll be it.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Millen, would you like to take that one?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The original estimation was done by Council's consulting engineers, Oricon, back in 2009, and the estimate at the time was between $5.3 to $5.8 million, and the difference is the type of, whether the drainage, whether it was a swale drain or curb and channel. So that was done a number of years ago. If we were to bring those dollars into current dollars, we haven't done a recent estimate. You're looking at around $10 million to $10.3 million for a similar design, concept and location. However, I stress that the $10 million comment is only an estimate. We haven't got anything since the original estimate all those years ago.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Millen.
As a measure of the detrimental effect of COVID on our arts centre, could councillors be provided with the approximate comparative figures of the last 2 financial years, please, Mr Mayor?
Through you, Mr Hawson.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Just in regard to attendance at the theatre and the gallery, a total of 85,000 was in 18-19, because that was the previous financial year, and in 19-20 there was 65,000. So there's a 20,000 decrease, and that's participating in all different programs, so the theatre, the gallery. Just in regard to the theatre itself, in 19-20 there was 43,000, and in 18-19 there was 53. So there's still a distinct gap, and the theatre was closed since March in its entirety, although it did do a lot of online stuff, but we haven't counted them in terms of attendance figures. So it was a huge impact in terms of people being able to participate.
Thank you, Mr Hawson. I just think it's an interesting subject coming into the budget, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'll put this through you to the CEO. In the CBD plan, under the implementation summary, which is under high importance, was to review the governance model, roles and responsibilities. I have 2 questions relative to that. Is this reflective of the Mildura Regional Development's review that's current or intending? And is it necessary to consider the continuous review as a budget item?
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I may also see whether Mr Hawson may have something else to add to this. If not, we may take it on notice. But certainly in the CBD plan, it does talk about those governance structures. Now that deals not only with economic development and tourism, but also with regard to city heart and relationships with traders and the like. So the intention from the CBD plan would be to conduct a review. We had planned under the MOU for MRD, sorry about so many letters there, everybody, but under the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding with MRD, a review was called for within 2 years, I think, of the most recent agreement. That has been delayed as a consequence of COVID, where we determined that it wasn't the appropriate time to unsettle the current business and economic environment. But certainly our intention would be to progress that review in time, and certainly with Mr Parham we have looked at where the opportunity for some funding for that is in the budget, but that will be subject to budget deliberations.
Okay. Do we have timelines?
No, I will take that on notice. As I said, we have been acutely conscious of the business support that have been pushed out by those agencies at the moment, and didn't want to distract the industry or those important agencies as they're providing business support. So I suspect it's a little further out at the moment, but we can come back and confirm timelines for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reckle. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've only got a couple. First one is, I've only sort of became aware of this yesterday, but the RACV have been doing some work on our state roads, and the story indicated that at the current rate of repairs, it's going to take 1,000 years to bring the roads up to a standard. And I'm just wondering what our take on this is. given the condition of some of our roads. And further to that point, they're also looking at death rates and accident points on country roads, and Mildura's got quite a few, and it seems that many of the measures that are being put into place at the moment are cutting deaths in the metro area but not the country areas. But I'm more interested in some feedback on the fixing the roads up, because 1,000 years is kind of a bit long for me to wait anyway.
Through you, Mr Millen.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll have to take it on notice to give you a considered response, Councillor Milne. I could make comment this evening, but I'd rather consider a response and provide you with something that's more fully documented and researched.
Yeah, I'd like that, because I think a bit of an in-depth report on that one would actually be helpful for the community too, because roads are a point of contention, and maybe that could include how much funding we get from the government versus how much we've got available. The next one, again on money, is how much money's been raised in landfill levies that's gone back to the state government since that levy came into place, and how much has actually come back into this municipality from that same levy.
Through you, Mr Millen, if that's okay.
Again, back through you, Mr Mayor. I'm aware that since 2009, the levy collected through the landfill is around about $12 million. It's just shy of $12 million. Since the last 5 years, it's been closer to $7 million of that 12. So I have those numbers for you. So since 2009, $12 million, but in the last 5 years, of the 12, the $5 million has been raised, if you will.
So that's 12 million a year.
No, 12 million since 2009.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years,
Oh, yeah.
it equals
Yeah.
$7 million. So you can see it's been a little bit of an escalation in that figure. I'd have to take the receipt of grants and monies on notice, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Millen.
Thank you for that. And again, this is one that I've noticed, and the Redcliffe people will be happy. Happy and not happy, because the pool will be out of action, but council rebuilding that pool. But on that same note, have we had any figures on the attendances at pools this year, given that it's been freezing cold and COVID on top of that? What are the numbers? How's that affected finances? And is it having an effect on the contracts that we've got with the operators of the swimming pool? Is that coming back to council?
Through you, Mr Hawson.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I don't know the number off the top of my head, Councillor Milne, but it has affected, because you're correct, there has been, it hasn't been as warm as what it typically is in summer, so numbers are down. It is reported in our monthly management report, and I'd have to check that to get the exact numbers. But with regard to affecting the contract, that's all taken into account. Ideally, there is a profit return if we get the attendance up, and obviously that would be affected in the sense, but we don't budget to make that profit. That's just, that's a good thing if it happens, but it may well not happen for a host of reasons, including COVID and also the cooler weather.
I'm not saying, in case anybody thinks that I'm saying pools aren't useful, I'm not saying that. It's just out of awareness of what's going on. So I don't want anybody jumping to a conclusion. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Millen. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Currently, the Victorian Government is reviewing their Geographic Place Names Act 1998, and I would like some feedback if we can influence the naming of our streets and roads by developers, and if we can create some guidelines in line with the Act that is currently open for feedback until the 18th of March. And currently the Act is looking to encourage more gender equality in place names and further adoption of Aboriginal language names and a broader look at the type of people who are acknowledged through place names. So I'm wondering if we could influence developers and the place naming of streets.
Would you like to answer that one, Mr Parham?
Thank you, Mayor. So, as Councillor Hill has mentioned, it is a state, I guess, run process of legislation we need to comply with. But yes, certainly we can provide input into the review which is underway. I would like to note that on previous occasions we have, I guess, sought the guidance of the state in this regards, and also where we have wished to name some certain locations or some certain streets, and that hasn't been permitted. We have sort of, I guess, reflected our thoughts on that, but we're again happy to provide further input to that process, absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Parham. Yes.
Just following on from that question, so when developers are naming our streets, do they provide the list of names for our approval?
I believe they do, yes, and we go through a process to assure that there's alignment with the policy and legislation that's in place.
All right, thank you. And my second question, in view of our tight budgets over the next couple of years, I just wonder if we could investigate raising funds through our assets. My particular focus is on tasteful advertising on our 80-plus bus stops.
Mr Hawson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apparently I'm in charge of advertising on bus stops, but this matter has
Put it to a resolution right now.
This matter has been looked at in the past, to the extent where we did a expression of interest to look at trying to do exactly what you're saying, and unfortunately there wasn't any take-up of that expression of interest. So we can go through that process again to see if there is any further interest. It's just a question of getting someone involved who believe they can make a commercial a gain out of it, and obviously then there's a return to council. But we're really talking about an advertising agency getting involved and selling advertise for those spaces. And at this point we weren't able, well, when we first did the expression of interest there was no interest. So that may have changed, and we can put out an EOI or reiterate the one we've already done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hawson. I think Councillor Arney had a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. At a forum last year, I raised the point regarding handing back some of the unused or underutilised laneways that exist out in our rural and regional area of the municipality. I'm just wondering at what stage we're up to, whether that's actually been considered or has the concept disappeared, because the reason I raised it is to remove some of the maintenance and other responsibilities, including monetary responsibilities, from council and hand them back to Delaware.
Mr Millen, would you like to take that one?
I'll have a go, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
As far as I'm aware, there's a fairly rigorous process for laneways and rights-of-ways for the sale of them. We would have to do an assessment of those laneways that are not going to be used for any, I suppose, useful purpose, and we would have to go through that process. And then there is a process of sale or a process of asset sale that we'd have to go through. I'm not aware that we've gone through all of the surplus, I suppose, facilities or laneways at this particular stage. So hopefully that gives you some direction.
I think Mr Parham has something to add there too, Councillor Arney.
Thank you, Mayor Modica, and thanks, Mr Millen, as well. So, Council does, from time to time, put proposals and recommendations to Council in regards to the sale of laneways, and in recent times there have been some, particularly in some of the more urban areas. So those opportunities do come through. Some of that is also community driven as well, where members of the public are interested in either purchasing a laneway, consolidating titles, or merging land parcels as well. So as soon as we're made aware of those, we do act on those, and they do come before Council from time to time. I don't believe at this stage there's been I guess you could say, a proactive review of all the laneways and roadways across the municipality in that sense.
Thank you, Mr Parham.
My question in particular is in regards to, and I'll use the Miller as an example, the number of disused or unused laneways that Council is responsible for maintaining. However, the fact that they're either unused or used to a very, I guess, low number of uses per week or day or year, that the opportunity arises that those laneways can actually be handed back to DELP, and they become DELP's responsibility rather than Council, so Council are no longer required to maintain them. And that's what the discussion was around, and I'm just wondering at what stage that process is at, as opposed to laneways in and around the urban areas.
CEO Philpott will respond to that. Councillor Arney.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Councillor Arney, we will take that on notice and go back and revisit the forum conversation and come back to you with a more comprehensive answer, understanding the specifics that you're looking for. So we'll provide you additional information.
Thank you, CEO Philpott. I have another question too, please, if I may. I'm just wondering at what stage the gazetting, I suppose, I don't know if that's the right term or not, is at for the A-triple roads in our municipality.
Mr Millen, would you like to tackle that one?
I'd have to take that one on notice, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's all I have.
Are there any other councillor questions? Thank you for all those questions. We'll move to item 13 on the agenda, and item 13.1 are petitions, and the petition is the Riverfront Development Proposal, with a recommendation at item 2 that Council note the petition, note that the issues raised were addressed within the resolution made at the Special Council meeting on the 10th of Feb 2021, and advise that the first named petitioner accordingly. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eckel, a seconder. Councillor Wood. Does anybody want to object to that motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. And now we move to item 14, management reports. Item 14.1 is councillor expenses report from the 1st of October 2020 to the 31st of December 2020. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Wood, a second to Councillor Milne. Does anybody want to object to that motion?
Can I say something?
Sorry, Len?
Can I say something about the expenses?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, just through you, Mayor Monica. I have expenses on here, and I've never handed in expenses sheet, so unless I've been fined for that.
Is that the $144?
Yeah, unless someone's been driving my car.
I do like a Land Rover, and I haven't had the keys yet.
So.
Thank you.
Through you, CEO Philpott.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Wood. We'll go away and clarify that. We may have put it in the wrong column potentially, but I'll just double check that and come back and confirm for councillors.
Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour of the motion is carried. We now move to item 14.2 on the agenda, which is Victoria's 30-year infrastructure strategy submission to Infrastructure Victoria, with a recommendation at item 2 that Council note and endorse the attached submission to be made by Mildura Rural City Council Chief Executive Officer to Infrastructure Victoria. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eckel, a seconder. Councillor Wood. Does anybody want to object to the motion?
I'd like to speak to it, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Speak to the motion now, Councillor Eckel.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank the Council Executive for taking the Council through this at our last forum, and I read the notations at the end, and they're pretty succinct and really important that, and I think it was, what is it, every 3 to 5 years it's refreshed, and we really need to make our voice felt down there, because in regards to infrastructure strategy, it was a disaster in regards to transport for this region, and we've made those points, and I thank Council for the report, and let's hope that something is done in regards to the state government listening and taking into account our grievances as far as our transport connections are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eckel. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. And we now move to item 14.3, which is a response to petition Cabarita Community Incorporated, the student study, with a recommendation at item 2 as read. So there's 7 points there. Do I have a mover? Councillor Reynolds?
Through you, Mayor Modica, I'd like to move that the recommendation is tabled.
Thank you. To lay the recommendation on the table?
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Power. And would like to... no debate. So all those in favour of this motion being laid on the table, the motion to lay the item on the table is successful, and that will come back to us next month. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Mayor Modica, can I speak to the motion?
Yes, Councillor Reynolds, briefly.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Modica, I'd like to thank the Planning Department for the work that they put into this motion. The information provided at the last forum was comprehensive. However, page 43 of the agenda that's presented to us today said that the petition highlighted the following concerns. However, the list that's in the agenda doesn't actually reflect the concerns as listed in the original petition. It does address the general concerns that have been raised over time between...
Mr. Mayor, point of order. I think this is getting right off the path. This still has to come back to Council for debate. It's a procedural motion. You lay it on the table. It's finished. It's dealt with. You don't go through a discussion and a debate over a motion that's laid on the table.
Yeah,
It comes back to the next meeting.
I will support Councillor Milnes laying it on the table. I was just
explaining why I'm decided to go through that motion. That's all.
Yep. No, sorry. I was after a brief outline. Sorry, Councillor Reynolds. So.
Don't think I'd even got into the outline yet, actually, Mayor Modica, but fair enough. Fair enough,
yep. As I said, as Councillor Milnes wrote, it is coming back. It was after just a small overview of why it was laid on the table, so I'll support that motion. Thank you, Councillor Milne. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. We move to item 14.4, which is the adoption of environmental sustainability and climate change policy, with a recommendation at item 2 that Council adopt the environmental sustainability and climate change policy CP04 as presented. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Reynolds, a seconder. Councillor Arney. Does anybody want to object to the motion?
I've got some questions.
Happy to take the questions, Councillor Milne.
I'm just confused as to what we're trying to achieve. Do we have a figure for our community? I think I've asked the question before. A carbon figure that our community produces you know, what's the deficit? Where do we sit? Because I can't find what we're aiming to do. I mean, we've got to understand the point from where we're at to if we're going to achieve. Are we going to go up and down, and what's that point? Has anyone got that point
you want to,
of where we sit at the moment?
Yeah, like a fixed dollar amount, Councillor?
No, not a dollar amount. The amount of carbon dioxide this community produces. Like if we're trying to cut greenhouse gases, what's the figure? So where are we starting at so we know if we're going up or down?
Through to you, Mr Hawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have an estimate of what we use through periodically we do a measurement through our the agency that we use to estimate what we use based on our power usage and so forth. However, we don't have a net figure of any offsets or carbon counting process that would reduce that in terms of getting to a net zero figure. The aim is to bring it down to as minimal as what you can. That's as much information as we've got at this point in time. To do the actual offsets of all our green areas and how much how much oxygen that produces to do an offset would be quite a significant piece of work, and unless the state government actually supports us in doing that, we wouldn't necessarily have that offset amount.
I'll go back to, would anybody like to object to the motion?
I will for the point of debate.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Milne. I will now ask Councillor Reynolds as the mover to open the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Modica. I would just like to congratulate the people that put together the policy. The group behind this has done a great job of identifying the areas that council can have an impact in increasing the sustainability and reducing our carbon footprint as a municipality. This policy gives us a lot of leeway and a lot of options that we can, and levers that we can use as a council to not only reduce the carbon dioxide that we are emitting, but also to take advantage of the economic benefits of doing exactly that. By reducing our carbon footprint and by taking on new technologies, we can actually increase the income into our municipality. We can increase tourism coming into this municipality. We can give ourselves a reputation as a clean and green environment that will attract people to come here just for that reason and to be part of that. So congratulations to the team. I think this is a great policy and I look forward to working with them in the future to see exactly what exciting things that we can do as a council towards reducing our carbon footprint.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Yeah.
I will now ask Councillor Arney as the seconder to speak to the motion if you choose, Councillor Arney.
Thank you, Mayor Modica. I don't think I need to speak to it. It speaks for itself, and I am quite content with what Councillor Reynolds has said. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arney. I'll now ask Councillor Milne as the objector to speak to the objection.
Speak to the motion. Yeah. Look, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just go through. There's more questions. My objection is really more about questions. It's not with having a policy. It's about how good the policy is and whether we can actually measure that. If we're going to have a policy, let's make it a meaningful policy that we can actually measure. So there's some numbers there, there's figures of some sort, financial, whatever, output, input, that at the end of the day, in 12 months, we can say, okay, we were here, we're now here, we were there, you know, and we are making a difference. The other thing is that we also need a policy that relates to the demographic of our community, so we're able to bring them along with what we're doing too. There's a number of points of concern I've got here, and one is in principles under point 3, page 54, protecting and enhancing the natural environment, including controlling new and emerging pest species and supporting habitat linkages. How are we going to do that? At what cost? There's no cost figures on there. And we've got, again, issues that we've spoken of tonight, wild dogs, cats, you know, all those sorts of issues, huge cost, rabbits even, to control. And I think I'd like to see just a little bit more detail in there. Reporting environmentally sustainable performance transparently, to who? And minimising car and air travel, but we've also got to look at some of the costs and how that relates to our community. If we go further down, single-use plastics, and they're the point of, I think today, one of the supermarkets is...
Yes, Councillor DePiero.
Well, I respect Councillor Mills' concern, but they are concerned. Is he fundamentally speaking against the motion or raising a number of concerns, but still supporting or still objecting to the motion? I'm not clear where he is going.
I will let Councillor Milne and won't take your point of order on notice. I'll let Councillor Milne talk, but we'll advise that he sticks to the relevance of the documentation.
But is he for or is he against?
He has. Councillor Milne, you have 5 minutes to talk. Thank you for that, but I'll let him go, but I take that on board.
I'm allowed to have my say. Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've seen the banning of single plastics. Plates at one of our, I think, Big W or Coles or someone, that will impact on some families. Are we putting too much on families? Single-use plastic, that's wrapping your food in plastic. What's the alternative? Can people in our community afford that? I think these are some of the issues that we need to be considering when we put something in place and we're going to go out there and sell it to our community. Is our community going to accept that? Or how are we going to sell it to them? What are we going to do? And I note another point here on encouraging and inspiring the community to live sustainable lifestyles and build their resilience to current and future climate change impacts. No problem with that, except how do you do it? Are we going to change our building policies to accept houses built out of second-hand material? Are we going to make it easier? How are we going to make this work? And how do we improve it? How do we build it to actually reflect better into our community? Some of the other points here, invasive plants and animal plants. Is this really our role? Are we taking on too much with this policy where the government will say, well, hang on, you've adopted it, you've accepted the responsibility, so you can fund it. So I just think, like I said, I had too much to say to ask all of these as questions, but maybe it goes a little bit too far at this stage, or maybe it just doesn't explain enough or give some pathways to bring the community along with it. So I've got concerns about it. So that's it, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion?
Yes.
Councillor Healy.
Thank you. Like Councillor Reynolds, I would like to commend the work that's been done on this and the presentation they gave us in the forum last week. Like Councillor Reynolds, I also think maybe they could go a little further. I think it's a really good policy. And in answer to some of Councillor Milne's questions, well, what sits under any policy are the plans. So when he talks about how we're selling it, what are we going to do, the answer is there's an environmental education plan sitting there under the policy. If he talks about how we're going to measure it, there will be inherent measurements and costing in a lot of those guidelines and plans that sit under this. I think that it's very obvious in the world right now that we must take action, we must take decisive action, and we must take it now. And particularly, it's a 1-year anniversary since the Mildura City Council declared a climate change emergency, and we were one of the very first regional municipalities to do that, and now many more are following suit, and I commend the work of following up with that climate change emergency motion, because it means it's not just words and there's all these policies sitting under it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Would any other councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any other councillor like to speak for the motion?
Just like a few comments, Mr. Mayor. I think that it was long overdue. It's an aspirational document, of course, and as I had the opportunity to once recently write in Sunrise Daily, an aspiration is that. It's a desire, and it takes time and effort and commitment to answer the valid points raised by Councillor Milne. But if you don't begin, and if you keep putting it off because you have these concerns, we will never progress. And in fact, dare I say, I've been watching this council for many years, that the word climate change wasn't even allowed to be used in this chamber for many years. Now at least we have acknowledged that. We're not
Point of order,
burying our
Mr.
heads
Mayor.
in the sand.
I don't think that's correct, that the word climate change wasn't allowed to be used
I think
in the chamber.
I'll let Councillor De Pieri go with that one, because it's an opinion on what he thought's happened from an outside of
Maybe I'm wrong,
Council.
Councillor Mill. Maybe I am wrong. I'm quite prepared to say that I'm wrong. The reality is that it took a long time before such a document saw the light of day, and I hope that step by step we are able to take responsibility, the right sort of responsibility, in a world which is really presenting some really nasty and catastrophic features. We all have a responsibility towards future generation. I've got young people in my family, and I am very proud of what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Pieri. Thank you for the debate, councillors. I'll now ask Councillor Reynolds as the mover to close the debate. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mayor Modica, and thank you, councillors, for your input into that. Thank you, Glenn, for raising those issues, but as Helen has said, the issues that you raised can be addressed, and they can be addressed in the plans that we have underneath that policy. The policy gives us the scope and the width to be able to address the issue of climate change, and the plans will give us the methods and the means of achieving those aspirations that Stefano was just talking about. The worries that you have about the costs of implementing these things, the worry that I have and many people have is the costs of not implementing these things. Some of the things that are raised, you talked about plastics, for example. Yes, they can be an impost on people, but in what we should be aiming for as a council is to have influence on not only our state representatives but also business in general, and to put pressure on those businesses in the states to make sure that the products that we have available to us in the stores give us a choice and give us an equal choice that doesn't then put an impost on us, and that is certainly possible. So there's nothing that's impossible, nothing that is going to be putting too much of a burden on our people, and in fact the costs really lie in not doing anything. So thank you very much again to the people who put the policy together.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I will now put the motion to a vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. The motion is carried. I now move to item 14.5 on the agenda, the adoption of the Mildura Arts Centre Collections Policy, CP 069, Mildura Arts Centre Loans Policy, CP 070, and the Public Art and Design Policy, CP 045, with the recommendation at item 2 that Council adopt the updated Mildura Arts Centre collection policies as above stated. Do I have a mover for that motion?
And Mr Mayor, if it's passed, I'd like to talk to it, thanks.
Councillor Eccleston, seconder. Councillor Healy.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, you can, Councillor Milne.
Just a point of interest. What's our collection worth these days?
Mr. Horson, through you, sir.
Through you, Mr Mayor, reluctant to actually say a number specifically because it would be off the top of my head, but we do get an insurance...
realms, is it?
We do get an insurance evaluation periodically, I think it's every 3 years, that tells us what it may well be worth, and that has been up to 40 million in the past. I'm not sure of what the current
number is.
And can you indulge me with one more question, Mr. Mayor?
Certainly can, Councillor.
And have you got a figure off the top of your head roughly what we spend in conservation annually on that?
I believe in the Capital Works program it would be in the vicinity of $40,000, but I'll take that on advisement if it's wrong. But I think that was the latest number that was going into the Capital Works.
It's not a die in the ditch question.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. So we've got a mover and a seconder, Councillor Reckle and Councillor Healy. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, one thing I'd like to commend going forward on this is the adoption of this is that the two policies have been brought together. And good question asked by Councillor Milne there in regards to the worth of the collection. The issue with the report strategically, I believe, is very interesting because the key results and the goals to be achieved is to increase the access to a diverse range of arts and cultural experiences. So that lends itself to purchasing new art during the year, and we have a budget for that each year. A community that values and embraces its history and diverse cultural heritage. Really, the third point too is very important. The significance of the region's Indigenous culture is recognised through the arts and cultural experiences, and I really feel, looking at this, that we need to seriously consider an extension of this in as much as, and I think every councillor that's here tonight really respects and loves this municipality and this region. And I think that when we talk about culture, we talk about what we feel as far as the area is concerned, where we live, and how important it is to us. And I think a heritage strategy would be something that would be beholden of council to look at into the future. But I thank the staff and Antoinette for putting us through this the other day at Forum. And as I said, I think it's important that the two policies have been brought together because they do reflect each other. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to agenda item 14.6 with a recommendation at item 2 that Council endorse a submission for an application to support Recreation Victoria's Local Sports Infrastructure Fund facilities for active seniors program for the Mildura and Mildura Workers Bowling Club change room upgrade and allocate $111,500 excluding GST across the 2021, 2022, 2023 Capital Works program for the Mildura and Mildura Workers Club change room upgrade project, subject to the successful funding application to Sports Rec Victoria. Do I have a mover? Councillor Milne. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wood. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to agenda item 14.7 with a recommendation at item 2 that Council endorse a submission for the application to support Recreation Victoria's Local Sports Infrastructure Fund Community Sports Lighting Program for Henshallwood Recreation Reserve Oval Lighting Project and allocate $140,000 excluding GST across the 2021, 22 and 23 Capital Works program for the Henshallwood Recreation Reserve Oval Lighting Project, subject to the successful funding application to Sports Rec Vic. So do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Wood, a seconder. Councillor Eckel. Does anybody want to object to the motion? I'll put the motion. The motion is carried. We move to item 14.8 with a recommendation at item 2 that Council adopt the new Councillor Code of Conduct as presented below. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Milne, a seconder. Councillor De Pieri. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Milne.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This is a very important piece of legislation for our council, or a very important rule book, if you like, that all councillors are expected to adhere to. And I think we just need to acknowledge that there's been a lot of work going into this by councillors, by staff, and much of it is dictated by the Act. But thank you to all the staff that have put this together, and hopefully it's a better code of conduct than we've had, and more applicable to today's council. And thank you everybody that did this work and put it together, and now we've all got to stick by it.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. I will now put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.9 with the recommendation at item 2 that Council adopt the updated Councillor Portfolio Policy CP028 as presented. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Wood. A seconder? Councillor Reynolds. Does anybody want to object? Does anyone want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion?
Oh, I've got a question.
Oh, sorry, question. I thought you were speaking.
My question, I just want a bit of clarity around the Cemetery Trust. That's in this one.
That's
That's in the next one. It's all right, I've actually caught up now on the... No, I'm right. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
You okay, Glenn? Oh, sorry, Councillor Milne. There's my code of conduct right out the window. I will now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.10, Councillor representation on portfolios, with the recommendation that Council appoint the following councillors to the portfolios listed below. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor De Pieri. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Arney. Sorry, does anyone have any objections to that motion? Question, Councillor Milne?
Yeah, this time, the Mildura Cemetery Trust, I'm listed there as a councillor for that. I have asked a question. I was just wondering what the timeline is expected to be to bring this in line with the council, where the whole council actually become the committee.
That is actually under the next item.
Councillor Parham, General Manager Parham, would you like to have something to say? And I'd just like to... I think it's the next item again, Glenn, because there's 3 portfolio item things.
This is, are we at 14.11?
14.10.
Oh. Okay.
Is that what you were trying to point out, Mr. Parham?
All right, I'll hold off on that question.
Okay, so Councillor De Pieri moved, Councillor Arney seconded. There's no objections. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 14.11. Councillor representation on boards, with a recommendation at item 2 that Council resolve to appoint councillors and/or officers to the following boards and committees. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Milne, seconder.
With a question. Third time lucky.
I have a question too.
Councillor Milne first, and then Councillor Healy.
Yeah, back to the timeline for the change to the Cemetery Trust.
Councillor Power. Lucky I take notes, eh?
Do I ask it again? Okay. The question is the timeline to resolve the Mildura Cemetery Trust to when it actually becomes the role of all the councillors.
Mr Parham, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Modica. Thanks for the question, Councillor Milne. So at this point in time, the Mildura Cemetery Trust is a separate legal and financial entity to council. It's a trust within its own right, whereby three councillors are appointed as the trust members. We are working through a process at the moment to, I guess, dissolve that current legal and financial separation in order to bring the trust fully inside of council and operate as a council team as per other areas within council, and at which point all councillors would become the trust members. That's a fairly lengthy process that we have to go through and seek state government approvals for. At this stage, I'm hoping that we will have that process completed by the end of the calendar year. So at least I would suspect for the basis of this calendar year, we would still need 3 councillors to be those trust members.
Councillor Milne, just for some clarity, if that's okay, we know that you've got a heavy workload, and I've spoken to Councillor Reynolds and I've spoken to Mr Parham about whether Councillor Reynolds will replace you, and if we could organise that tonight, it could be put through in this vote in this meeting. So I'm leaving it up to both of you.
I'm happy to move an amended motion with, subject to the seconder agreeing, to have Councillor Reynolds in there, because I wouldn't want to take on the job and not be able to do it. So I'm quite happy if Councillor Reynolds is happy to move the motion with Councillor Reynolds on the Mildura Cemetery Trust rather than myself.
Councillor Power, are you happy with that?
We can just correct.
We will accept your amended motion.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Very much appreciate that, and appreciate your workload too, Councillor Milne. So we have a mover, Councillor Milne, a seconder, Councillor Reynolds, for the amended motion. Councillor Power, sorry.
As amended.
As amended, yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to object to the motion? Did you have a question?
No, it was answered.
It was answered. Thank you. Thank you, CEO Philpott. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone, for that. We now move to item 14.2 with a recommendation at item 2 that Council increase the Chief Executive Officer's financial delegation from $250,000 to $1 million. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Eckel. A seconder? Councillor De Pieri. Does anybody want to object to the motion?
Just another question.
I'm happy to take that, Councillor.
No, pretty well with questions tonight, Mr Mayor. I take it, and I guess it's in here, that this does relate to budgeted items, and anything outside of the budget at any amount would come back to councillors.
General Manager Parham.
Through the Mayor, Councillor Milne, yes, it does relate to the exercising of that delegation within approved budgets. Any items that fall outside of the budget would come back to Council for decision.
Thank you. Happy with that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We move to item 14.3 with a recommendation at item 2 that Council receive the Internal Audit and Risk Committee Chairperson's biannual report for the 6-month period from the 1st of July to the 31st of December 2020. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Healy. A seconder? Councillor De Pieri. Would anybody like to object to the motion?
I'd risk another question, Mr Mayor.
I don't think it's a risk by this stage, Mr Milk.
It's a habit.
I would like, if you look at page 155, about the middle, where the committee noted the majority of issues raised in the Maple final management letter. There seems to be a high degree of risk with Maple, with the airport at the moment. Has anybody got a little bit more information on that as to how that affects council. Should that be noted, or should we be concerned, I guess?
General Manager Parham.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Milne. So just let councillors know that we are meeting regularly with the airport in regards to the current financial situation, which is COVID related, and obviously the restrictions on travel and so on and so forth that are related to that. So we do have ongoing meetings and updates from them. I'm also proposing that the airport present to councillors at the March forum to provide councillors with an update on that current situation.
Yeah, I'm happy with that answer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We move to item 14.4, which is a supplementary agenda, which came out Monday evening. It's the management report on the agenda of 14.4. It's the funding strategy to deliver identified Mallee Track projects, with a recommendation at item 2 that Council note the strategic package of the Mallee Track projects outlined in this report, endorse the allocation of up to $1 million to the identified Mallee Track projects for the Mildura Rural City Council 2021-22 budget to enable eligible grant funding applications. Endorse the application of $100,000 in the 2021-22 budget for the delivery of the Murraville Recreation Reserve Community Complex and Change Room project, subject to the successful outcome of funding applications, and note the intention to seek community contribution for any budget shortfall which, if not possible, would be met through the application to use funding through Council's Community Support Fund. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Healy. Do I have a seconder? Councillor De Pieri. Does anybody want to object to the motion? Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councillor Healy.
Thank you. First of all, I want to acknowledge the work of the staff, such a comprehensive report, and the work they've put in to present all the options and the risk associated with the leveraging of this $1 million funds to obtain significant funding for the Mallee Track projects, which are the Oyen Gym, the Walpiup Hall, the Murraville Wetlands, Underbull Bowls, and the Murraville New Recreation Reserve Complex. I was present in August 2020 when this motion was passed to spend this money along the Mallee Track on projects that contributed to economic and wellbeing. Now, 6 months later, we're presented with an opportunity to get federal and state funding by leveraging this $1 million and expanding it into more projects. But it has risks revolving around it if we get none, one, or not the other, or both. So the issue for me up until we're thinking and talking about was option 3 and the risk in there. So if we were to get federal and state funds, everything would get funding. If we were to get federal alone, everything would get funded. But if we only get state, we have an issue and a risk that I believe is worth taking. Option 3 looks at the outcome if we only receive the state funding, which includes the female-friendly facilities, which are desperately needed, along with the entire recreation reserve at Murraville. The option lists the full $1 million in that case going to the Murraville Recreation Reserve. The reason I support this is there's plenty of funding opportunities for the other projects, but not this recreation reserve. If we don't do it now, it's unlikely to happen, as we're unlikely to have the $1 million in future to leverage this kind of funding. This is a one-off, once-in-a-generation opportunity to Murraville to have a desperately needed recreation reserve complex. And with this first time, women's change rooms. I think Murraville deserves this. They've had hard times with the border closures. They've shown great initiative with tourism projects, and they're remote from us and often feel neglected. I think we want to be known as a courageous council who take risks, and we want to make a difference. And I commit here and now to do everything in my power, and I hope you will join me, that if it does come down to option 3, to find the additional funding to fund the other 4 projects. Lastly, I think what I would ask is 3 things. 1, that we research immediately all funding options if option 3 does eventuate. Number 2, we lobby the federal MP and Webster to lobby on our behalf for the federal funding, and that we support our state MP, Ellie Cupper's current move to get this funding through the state government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Eckel?
Yes, I don't agree with everything but it's not a debate, everything that Councillor Healy said, but all I'd like to say is that we're putting great faith in our local members, both Ellie Cupper and Anne Webster. Very important that both of them come through, and I think that the big thing about this recommendation going through is the confidence that this council has in our local members. I think that's the thing that we're selling here to the community, that we do have tremendous faith in both our members and their conscientiousness in regards to the needs of the Mallee track and Murrayville in particular on this particular issue, because it does lean very heavily towards Anne Webster. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Would anybody else like to speak?
Yeah, just briefly. Mr Mayor, I notice these projects are designed, like the government designs them, where they give funding to actually put money into local communities. And I think we just need to be very mindful that as much as possible we can put money back into those local communities through this project. Now, you know, they're small towns, so they're tradesmen, etc. I don't know, you know, I haven't got a skills profile of Murrayville or any of the towns along the Mallee track, but I think we need to look very closely at that to see if we can not only build them a great facility, but make sure that they get the greatest possible benefit out of that. So as much as possible, local tradesmen are used, because then you really get a win-win, which is the idea, to put money back into small communities. And it doesn't happen very often, and there's a fair chance that Mildura could end up with, you know, contracts, and our workers go from there and it puts money into this community. So I'd just like us to be very mindful of how we can do that and provide those small communities with the greatest possible outcome, and I think that would benefit them as well. So great project. Thank you to our staff for putting it together, and you look forward to a win on this one, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. I will now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. That was the end of the management reports. We now move to item 15, which is urgent business, and there is no urgent business except in council when all business is urgent. We move to we move to item 16, which is community questions. We have two of those. CEO Philpott.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. The first community question is from Mr Steve Prescott, and it relates to the powerhouse and the various musical and arts societies that were previously located within the powerhouse. So the question, and I'll summarise it, it's a reasonably long comment, is the question is, when will the council provide an actual large enough space to which the musical society established in 1938 will be able to rehearse and construct sets for performances? I'll hand to Mr Hawson.
Thank you, Ms Philpott. Through you, Mr Mayor. The current plan that we've got, obviously, for the powerhouse is to create a performance space that's accessible to see performances, and that was one of the requirements of our funders in doing the powerhouse project. The longer term plan is that the master plan for the Arts Centre precinct does have a space provided for rehearsal and workshop space provided for all groups that may well, or all theatre groups and alike, that may well be interested in doing that. And that is a longer term objective that will come out in the master plan, and which is very close to coming on public exhibition and asked for comment. So I'd encourage Mr Prescott to respond to that positively and support that notion. It is noted that the Powerhouse did provide a venue for rehearsal and exhibition space, and preparation workshop space for 2 theatre groups, but it was a duplicate function and they were doing the same function in the one building. So the idea is to make that the performance space and then look at alternate venues for the workshop and rehearsal space, noting that council is providing that at the moment through other venues as well. So it's not exactly the same, but we are doing our best to accommodate that, and obviously the longer term plan is contained in the master plan.
Thank you, General Manager Hawson. We have one more, CEO Philpott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the second question is from Kane Vera, and it relates to articles that have been on the front page of the paper with regard to vandals and thieves at the cemetery. And again, I won't read the entire thing, but it notes that when we were asked to comment, we stated that we weren't considering the installation of CCTV. So the question is, if the council is aware that a grave robbery is happening and the installation of CCTV is too expensive, then what else is council considering to prevent thefts from occurring, and what other strategies are being considered to hold people accountable for their actions? And I'll hand to Mr Parra.
Thank you, CEO. So firstly, I'd just like to say that I will ring Kane and speak to Kane directly, because there's a number of elements to the question and it is quite lengthy. I'd also just like to reiterate, as I mentioned before for a previous question, that the Cemetery Trust is a separate legal and financial entity to council, and up until this point in time, I guess if there was to be installation of CCTV, then that would actually be a Cemetery Trust decision and not something that would be, I guess, directly funded by council in that sense. The response that was provided back to the media outlets was that up until this point in time, we hadn't considered the installation of CCTV, and the Cemetery Trust hadn't considered the installation of CCTV, and that is principally because of the size of the area that would have to be monitored, and the locations. They're unfenced locations, etc. So the practicalities of doing that would be quite challenging. But as mentioned, I will ring Kane and discuss the other aspects of the email and the question. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just pause here for a moment to acknowledge that tonight is Richard Sexton's, I'm going to chuck up final council meeting before he retires from council this week. For those that don't know, Richard has served, let's call it 40 years with council, seeing us through the amalgamation of the former city of Mildura and the shires of Mildura and Walpi up into the now Mildura Rural City Council. Sorry. Richard has worked with in excess of 8 incoming councils, countless mayors, and we could establish that since electronic records were kept, he has attended over 200 meetings of council in which he has provided value, support and guidance. Currently overseeing the areas of consumer support, marketing, communications, property service. Sorry, Richard, I'm losing it again. Richard has provided valuable support to council staff and members of the community. So on behalf of this and all previous councils, Richard, we wish you all the best in your retirement and enjoy your time with your family and friends.
And if that wasn't heartfelt, I don't know what it was.
Thank you, my man.
I have to call for a
motion.
motion.
It's an appropriate way to finish, Rich.
Yeah.
Look, seriously, Richard, it's been, we've only done 4 years, but it seems like 40 years in the good way. So thanks again, Rich. Thanks for that indulgence. Could I have a mover to move into confidential business, please? Councillor De Pieri, a seconder. Councillor Reynolds. We have two items. 17.1 is the design service for the Mildura Regional Sporting Precinct. The council, sure, that's all right. And number 2 is the tender award for the road reconstruction works at the Crescent in Mildura. Thank you everybody for coming this evening. Sorry for my emotive ending, and thanks everybody for the wide-ranging debate. And catch you all next month. Thank you.